Okay, the next item of business is a debate on motion 19977 in the name of Jackie Baillie on crisis in social care. I'd invite members wishing to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. And I call on Jackie Baillie to speak to and move the motion. Ms Baillie, around 7 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, my constituent Charles McGarvey was an English teacher, but in 2018 his life changed forever. Following an accident, he became quadriplegic. He cannot use his arms and legs and must rely on support from carers. Life being paralysed is challenging enough, but in the last year, the specialist team who supported him has disappeared, and he only learned through word of mouth that his overnight care would be terminated. Mr McGarvey's care needs haven't changed. What has changed is a relentless drive for cuts in social care, and his story is typical of many receiving social care across Scotland. Yet the UK Labour Government has delivered more than £10 billion of additional funding for Scotland since 2024, but it's up to this SNP government to spend it. So where has the money gone? It's not gone into social care. For years, the SNP have underfunded health and social care partnerships, the local bodies responsible for the delivery of social care. Now the system is on the verge of collapse. There is a black hole in their budgets of almost £500 million in this financial year. So it's no wonder they're being forced to make cuts. At least £90 million cut from services. At least £72 million cut by reducing social care capacity. At least £68 million cut from staffing budgets. And the list goes on and on. Social care providers in the voluntary sector are in danger of going to the wall. Care homes are closing, and across Scotland, it's the poorest and most vulnerable who are paying the price. We are now only funding crisis, and only those requiring critical care will get support. Everyone else asking for help will have to fend for themselves. In North Ayrshire, £500,000 slashed from care at home. £200,000 cuts to residents' care package. £200,000 cuts to daycare. They don't want to do this, but the Scottish Government is underfunding them. In Aberdeenshire, 8 projects closing, reduced eligibility for daycare centres, the number of activity hubs for older people halved. They don't want to do this either, but it's down to Scottish Government underfunding. 145 jobs lost in Glasgow to cover a £42.5 million gap, including the loss of a supported living service for elderly people, including people with dementia, and a counselling service for victims of sexual assault. They don't want to do that, but it's down to a lack of government funding. West Lothian is currently consulting on £14 million of cuts, including whether adult day service support days could be reduced. Care hours capped in Argyll and Bute, where the Health and Social Care Partnership is only funding critical care at the same time as closing day services and a care home. And in Edinburgh, the Health and Social Care Partnership cutting almost all funding to community mental health services. None of them want to be cutting services, but they're forced into doing this because they don't have the budget. And I know every few months the Health Secretary stands up, and I agree with him. We all need more preventative care in the community, but that is not the reality on the ground. The reality is that preventative services are being slashed, leaving families to struggle on until they are in crisis. Experienced social care staff are losing their jobs at a time when the sector is struggling to recruit. And for example, despite increasing clinical need, there are 28% fewer registered nurses in care homes for adults compared to 2013. A recent survey by the Coalition of Care and Support Providers in Scotland found that 82% of their members are funding shortfalls in contract costs themselves, and that's been going on for years. More pressure is being piled on unpaid carers who are yet to see the breaks that they are legally entitled to. And as the story of my constituent shows, even those with the highest care needs are seeing their support downgraded. This SNP government's neglect of Scotland's social care shames us all. It wasted £30 million and years of government time on a so-called National Care Service bill that was a mess and failed to pay for a single extra carer. It promised to scrap non-residential care charges, but we're still waiting. And to add insult to injury, the £20 million recently announced to improve social care capacity over the tough winter period is being given to health boards, rather than directing the funding actually at social care. And in the meantime, our population is growing older and sicker. The number of people waiting on a social care assessment is 30% higher than the same time last year, and nearly 2,000 people every month are stuck in hospital due to delayed discharge, mostly due to a lack of social care packages. We simply cannot afford for this to continue any longer. Now, at best, social care is delivered locally by a range of partners, the public, private and voluntary sector working together. That delivery is informed by the views of those being cared for and their families. It helps people remain in their own homes without needing to go into hospital. But we are reversing that because of the serious lack of underfunding. The Scottish Government needs to stop patting itself on the back. It needs to stop spinning the amount of money they're putting in, which simply fails to match the level of need that is evident and required. And I ask them in all sincerity, just implement the recommendations of the Feely report, which the government themselves commissioned. Raise the minimum wage for social care workers to £15 an hour so that doing a challenging job, caring, does not pay less than stacking shelves at Aldi. For 5 years, I am nothing if not consistent. I have asked the SNP to do this, but for 5 years they've said no. For years, the government blames its failures on absolutely everybody else. It's never their fault, and they continue to do so today in their amendment, instead of facing up to and dealing with this crisis. Presiding Officer, Scotland has a record budget settlement. This is the opportunity to make deep and meaningful change. The SNP government must learn the lessons of the past 2 decades and prioritise social care. It must close the funding gap, it must prioritise the needs of vulnerable people, and it must show it values our vital social care workforce before it's too late. I move the motion in my name.
Thank you, Ms Bailey. I now call on Neil Gray to speak to and move amendment 19977.1. Cabinet Secretary, around 5 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I move the amendment in my name. I'd like to start today's debate by thanking our incredible social care workforce for all that they do. Their hard work and resilience ensure that those who need care receive it with dignity and respect, including members of my family and I know colleagues across the chamber. I do not hide from the issues facing the social care sector which lie in Scotland and for which the Scottish Government holds responsibility. Far from it. I know there are complex challenges that require long-term action. Indeed, that is why my amendment specifically references the need for this Government to continue to work closely with partners across the sector, including funding local government and the community and voluntary sector, to continue making improvements for the social care workforce and all of those who they support. We need a sustainable and fair approach to funding the sector. Of that we can all agree. It's why our investment in social care, despite what Jackie Bailey has said, has reached record highs. Our amendment references the 25-26 budget, which the Greens and Liberal Democrats contributed to, which includes over £15 billion for the local government settlement and almost £2.2 billion for social care and integration, exceeding our commitment to increase funding by 25% early and by nearly £350 million. We continue to invest in our workforce through the real living wage, with an estimated £950 million that enables adult social care workers in the community and private sectors to be paid at least the real living wage. We have committed to establishing voluntary sectoral bargaining arrangements in Scotland, and we have been working through the Fair Work and Social Care Group to progress this. No one should have to wait for care assessments. Families should not be under any distress, and their loved ones should be supported and provided with the appropriate care package. I recognise the need for government to do more collectively and in partnership with COSLA and with social care providers to make improvements. So if I get the time back, President Officer, I'll take an intervention.
Paul Sweeney.
In this point of collaboration and cooperation, the Cabinet Secretary may be aware of my constituent, 6-year-old Bree McCann, who is urgently waiting a transfer to Great Ormond Street Hospital for a heart transplant. Is he aware of this case, and is he doing something to expedite it? Because it's a matter of hours we're talking about here, and that's why it's so urgent.
Yes, it's not directly related to social care, but yes, of course, I'm aware. I spoke to this issue on BBC Breakfast this morning. I understand it, and I've asked for proper collaboration to happen between Great Ormond Street and NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde to ensure that Bree can get the treatment and support that she needs. I do not shirk the responsibility of this government to work to improve social care. We are delivering on the commitments of the Care Reform Act passed by this Parliament, and we will establish a national social work agency by spring 2026. And I'm very open to anyone in this chamber that wants to work collaboratively on this. But despite Labour's claims of what they would do in power, far short of £15 an hour for social care workers, I note that the Chancellor Rachel Reeves' budget last week did not mention social care once. Indeed, Vic Rayner, the Chief Executive of National Care Forum, said, and I quote, "The truth is that the cupboard is bare. The budget, which neither recognises the contribution or the real cost of adult social care, feels like a missed opportunity." I must point out the glaring hypocrisy on display from the Labour Party today, because Jackie Baillie spoke of recruitment challenges, but it is her party who have presided over some of the most restrictive migration policies that are delivering a hammer blow to social care. And I know Jackie Baillie doesn't want to hear it, so instead let me share with her some comments from the sector. In May, Donald McCaskill of Scottish Care said, "When the United Kingdom Government, without consultation and engagement with the care sector, unilaterally decided we can no longer recruit from abroad, they did so with little appreciation of just how damaging their actions could be." In November, Donald McCaskill then urged Scottish Labour to challenge the latest migration proposals on settlement after 15 years, branding them insensitive to Scotland's distinct needs. He went on to say their impact, especially in Scotland's remote and rural communities, is incalculable. They also send a damaging message that the invaluable contributions of migrant care workers are not fully recognised or valued. Does Jackie Baillie support the UK Government's approach to migration that's undermining our communities?
Briefly, Jackie Baillie.
I say that this challenge has been ongoing for years now. Year after year, there have been vacancies in social care that they have been unable to fill because you do not pay them enough and because their terms and conditions are rubbish. Migration has only been a recent phenomenon in the last 2 years. You had the power to do something about it, and you have failed.
Always through the chair, Ms Baillie.
Presiding officer, I challenge Jackie Baillie to defend her government's approach to migration, which, in the words of the industry, is undermining our approach to recruitment and retention, and she failed to do so because her leader describes it as brave. It is nothing brave about sacrificing our critical services for our people on the face of supporting a Faragist approach to migration. We came to expect the draconian and Faragist approach to migration from the Tories, but under a Labour government we've seen an even more severe approach. A 77% drop in the year ending June 2025 in the number of health and care visas being granted by the Home Office. And Labour went even further and closed the social care worker visa entirely, completely undermining our ability to provide care to the most vulnerable members of our society. Labour will undoubtedly say today their focus is on supporting jobs for Scottish care workers, but the reality is the demographics of our population, our ageing population, we do not have enough workers in Scotland. We not only need international workers to bolster our workforce, but we also deeply value the contribution that they make. And those international workers make up an estimated 26% of our social care workforce. It's not brave to undermine our critical services. It is a disgrace, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, I think I need to conclude. Presiding Officer, Scotland has many talented and compassionate social care workers who have settled here and who call our communities home. We are determined they be allowed to remain in Scotland, making a difference in the lives of our most vulnerable, and I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Can I discourage the front benches for carrying on a conversation while somebody else is on their feet? I now call on Sandis Gulhani to speak to and move Amendment 19977.2. Around 4 minutes. Dr Gulhani.
Thank you. A declaration of interest as a practising NHS GP. Scotland's social care system is in crisis, not by accident, but because this SNP government has failed to prioritise it year after year. But, Deputy Presiding Officer, when organisations as broad as Scottish Care, Age Scotland, Alzheimer's Scotland, COSLA, the Accounts Commission and the Scottish Fiscal Commission all use the same language, breaking point, unsustainable, a perfect storm, it should shake this government out of its complacency. But alas, no. Instead, ministers behave as though acknowledging reality would somehow be disloyal to their own mythology, created in their ivory towers, surrounded by quangos telling them how great they are. Because that's exactly what Neil Gray's amendment is, another exercise in SNP exceptionalism, an attempt to airbrush out 18 years of failure by blaming anyone and everyone else. It is frankly extraordinary. At a time when delayed discharge is at record levels, when 1 in 5 care homes has closed, when thousands wait months for assessments, we are presented with an amendment so self-congratulatory it reads like the greatest hits album of an SNP campfire song.
Cabinet Secretary.
Sandis Gulhani for giving way. I recognise that there are going to be differences between ourselves and the Conservatives in terms of our viewpoints on this. But I hoped in my amendment you can see quite clearly that we are needing to work more with local government and our care providers, and that's acknowledged and that's our responsibility to do so. I also hope that there might have been a point of consensus on the point in the amendment around the need for a UK government to scrap the increase in employers' national insurance contributions that is costing £84 million to our social care providers.
Sandis Gulhani, I'll give you the time back.
But it is very clear that that was damaging, that the Labour budget was very damaging to our social care sector and also to our charities. But we also cannot get away from the fact that it's been 18 years of being able to fund councils appropriately and being able to do the right thing by social care. Deputy Presiding Officer, the SNP seem to be legends in their own mind. This government wants to tell us that the crisis is all caused by UK migration policy. Now, let me be clear. International carers make an invaluable contribution. But the idea that Scotland's social care crisis began this year or last is simply delusional. This workforce crisis has been there since 2015 as the workforce has been shrinking. Nursing staff in care homes have fallen by 28% in a decade. Providers are relying on financial reserves just to stay afloat, and none of that was caused by a visa rule change. What was caused by this SNP government is a waste of £30 million on the now abandoned National Care Service, money that could have employed 1,200 care workers or delivered 1 million hours of care, all squandered. And when that collapsed, what did we get? Another talking shop, boycotted by trade unions, costing thousands more. That is not reform. It's panic and it's drift. Meanwhile, delayed discharge has become the norm. In October alone, nearly 2,000 people were trapped in hospital despite being medically fit to go home. Over 61,000 bed days lost. Every delay backing up into A&E, cancelling operations and grinding staff into the ground. And let's not forget the human cost beyond the NHS. Unpaid carers, 627,000 people, nearly half cutting back on food and heating, a third driven into debt, only 13% receiving a break. If this doesn't sound the alarm bells, then I genuinely don't know what will spark ministers into action. We must close the funding gaps in health and social care partnerships, properly fund councils, establish a real workforce plan and finally recognise the value of this workforce, not with press releases, but by pay, training and respect. Scotland does not need more excuses or more constitutional diversions. It needs competence, it needs honesty, and it needs a government willing to fix the system it has allowed to deteriorate before our very eyes. And I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you, Dr Wilhani. And I call Mark Roskell again, around 4 minutes. Mr Roskell.
Thank you. And I'd like to pay tribute to the social care staff and unpaid carers of all ages who work so hard taking care of people under often very difficult circumstances. Low pay, understaffing and a lack of access to proper breaks from caring have all placed enormous pressure on people who give their all day in, day out. But I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the sector is in crisis. Historic underfunding has led to long waits for care and support, which is too often only available when people reach crisis point, if at all. And I think we can all reflect on the real experiences of our constituents and our own families. Parents being denied social care for a son when a package would transform the lives of everyone in the family. A grandfather trapped in a hospital bed, waiting for social work in the NHS to finally agree a package so he can return home. And despite the passage of the Care Act, fundamental reform of the sector is still needed, as the ambitions of the independent review of adult social care have not yet been realised. For example, we are yet to achieve ethical commissioning, which would recognise the value of the third sector as equal partners in delivering social care. Representatives from the sector are clear that the current commissioning model is harmful and unsustainable. According to SAMH, ethical commissioning should be based on partnership and cooperation between commissioners, social care providers and people in receipt of social care, rather than the existing model of competition which prioritises costs. I would like to hear from ministers in closing what steps they're taking to ensure that genuine ethical commissioning is taking place in the sector. The Scottish Government committed to ending non-residential social care charges in 2021, but since then no meaningful progress has been made. As a report published by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation last month highlighted, disabled people face deepening poverty and rising costs, and while disabled people's access to social care support is critical to their realisation of human rights, they are all too often being denied these rights by a system that brutalises them and fails to meet their basic needs. A Glasgow Disability Alliance survey conducted last year revealed what this means in practice for disabled people. 93% of them were worried about money, 71% could not meet their needs on their income, and 67% could not access social care that actually met their needs. The report found that at the same time as disabled people in their households are facing rising costs, local authorities are making decisions to increase non-residential social care support charges and raising eligibility thresholds for accessing support. The report is clear that the Scottish Government and COSLA should work together without delay to deliver a clear timeline for removing non-residential care charges. Now, I think it's right, particularly in the SNP's amendment, that it is noted that the UK Government's hostile immigration policies are now starting to have a devastating impact on the sector. And Scottish Care have warned that UK Labour's proposal to extend the qualifying period for settlement for legal migrants, particularly those from 5 to 15 years who are on the health and social care visas, will have a profoundly negative impact on care services across Scotland. We just cannot afford to lose these people, these hard-working people, from our sector. Now, I urge Scottish Labour to acknowledge the impact these policies will have and are having now on social care and the contribution to the crisis that exists in the sector. And I urge the Scottish Government, my closing sentences, I urge the Scottish Government to redouble efforts to fund and also to reform a social care system that is genuinely fit for the 21st century, using all the powers that it has today in this chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Roskell. And Alex Cole-Hamilton, again, around 4 minutes. Mr Cole-Hamilton. Thank
you very much, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, I'm grateful for Labour making time for this important issue today. As we convene in this chamber this afternoon, any number of our constituents may be waiting for an ambulance, either in their home or, worse still, in the street. Any number of our constituents may be in an ambulance waiting to get into accident and emergency, or trying to leave accident and emergency into the wider hospital. Any number of our constituents may be receiving that dispiriting telephone call to say that the elective orthopaedic surgery they were expecting to have tomorrow has now been cancelled, all for want of capacity in our hospitals. And that is because the crisis in our health service is not caused by a deficiency in emergency care. It's not caused by a deficiency in orthopaedic surgery. It's caused by the fact that on any given night in Scotland, 2,000 of our fellow Scots are trapped in hospital, well enough to go home, but too frail to do so, without a care package to receive them home or a care bed in a local care home. That reality causes an interruption in flow throughout our whole of our health sector. And this week it was revealed it's not just in our hospitals, presiding officer. I'm afraid I've got a lot to get through here. It was revealed that over 11,000 people are currently waiting on social care assessments and care at home packages. That's notwithstanding those people I've just talked about. These figures are a stark reminder of just how badly things have been allowed to drift. And make no mistake, bad policy choices are driving this crisis. The funding gap facing health and social care partnerships is widening, and the care workforce, the very people who hold this entire system together, are still not properly valued. They're not paid enough. Research conducted by my party found that 476 care homes for older people have either collapsed or been sold off since 2015. That includes 56 in Glasgow, 46 in Fife, 43 in Edinburgh, 36 in South Lanarkshire and 24 in the Highlands. That's decimating the Highland care offer. Behind those numbers are residents uprooted, families panicking about where their loved one will go, how they will travel the distance required to see them. Many say that they were forced to close because they simply were no longer financially viable. Some because they couldn't recruit the staff. This is a sector under impossible strain, and care providers feel that they're on their own. And it's clear to see why. The SNP wasted 4 years and £30 million of taxpayers' money chasing a bureaucratic takeover of social care that they eventually abandoned. That money could have paid the annual salary for 1,200 care workers. It makes you want to cry. That's 4 lost years. When the gaps in home care were glaring, costs soared, and homes were closing month after month after month. And the UK Labour government hasn't covered itself in glory either. They've hammered care providers with a national insurance hike on employer contributions, which makes recruitment and retention all the harder. And, presiding officer, I'm afraid I must make progress. I'm in my final minute. And, presiding officer, the care crisis is interrupting the flow of the whole of the NHS, as I said. It's one of the biggest reasons those A&E departments can't move patients on into the wider hospital. When social care fails, the NHS fails. So how do we solve this? Ultimately, Scotland needs a change of government next May, because the Scottish Liberal Democrats are the party of care. We introduced free personal care for older people, forced the ill-fated centralisation of social care out of the budget this year, created a new pipeline of care workers through Scotland's colleges, and for unpaid carers, too often overlooked, it was our party that secured the right for family carers to earn more from this year on, and passed the Carers Leave Act into law, giving new rights to 2.4 million carers to help them better balance work and caring responsibilities. Presiding officer, we also need to value the care workforce. We need to make it a profession of choice again, and pay them a living wage that they will find attractive. That's the fastest, simplest way to attract new staff and stop existing workers from leaving the profession entirely. Because only by fixing social care, presiding officer, can we fix our NHS, protect our communities and ensure that people in Scotland get the dignity and support they deserve.
Thank you. We now move to the open debate. I call first Carol Mochan, to be followed by Christine Graham, around 4 minutes. Ms Mochan. Thank
you, Presiding Officer. Can I first begin by extending my gratitude and thanks to all the health and social care staff who provide an extraordinary level of care and service to so many across Scotland. Having listened to what others have contributed so far in the debate, it is clear that the value of social care and its workforce cannot be understated. Excuse me, social care provides invaluable and tailored support to thousands across the country, improving quality of life and allowing as many as possible to lead an independent life. But what we know is many are missing out. Social care forms an integral part of our health system, yet we know, like many other areas of health care, a crisis within social care has been growing for quite some time. But it would seem that for 18 years this has been blanked from the minds of the current Scottish Government. With increasing demand, funding constraints and workforce pressure, the question of how we value and invest in social care has never been more important. The question of how do the Scottish Government value social care and invest is one that needs answered. A failure to prioritise has fuelled challenges, and despite repeated warnings to Government, health and social care partnerships now face serious budget shortfalls. This leads to local communities' care packages being cut, described to me by one carer as viciously cut, and it forces people to wait months for necessary support. IGB finances are at risk of collapse, and the continued trajectory of overspend, depletion of resources and reliance on one-off rather than recurring savings has, according to Audit Scotland, left a £457 million funding gap. The lack of funding for health and social care partnerships is not a new phenomenon. This has been a problem for some time. Year on year, the Scottish Government choose to ignore this. The Government might cite the rising demand in the sector or other areas as care becomes more complex, but this has absolutely been exacerbated by a lack of funding in the first instance, which has just not kept up with demand. Underfunding is not an isolated issue, it is a systemic problem seen right across Scotland. In my own South Scotland region, South Ayrshire IGB faced an end-of-year overspend of over £2 million. This has left the IGB with concerningly low reserves, significantly limiting its ability to respond to unexpected budget pressures. Levels of delayed discharge in South Ayrshire already sit well above targets. This is a symptom of overspend, a reduction in the funding available, and there is a need and to look at the root causes of this. Of course.
Very briefly, Emma Harper.
Be very brief. Would Carol Mochan welcome the work being done by the frailty unit that's been established in NHS D&G in Dumfries and the Garrick at Stranraer to help get people out of hospital faster, into the home safely and timely? That really is a good example of Scottish Government-led priorities.
Carol Mochan, I'll give you the time
Thank you. I think the reality is that we talk about these things, but when we talk to our constituents, it is very difficult for the funding to follow this. And so there is such a crisis that these small pockets that we can talk positively about do not replicate themselves across Scotland. And so many of our constituents sit waiting for care. I want to just be clear, Presiding Officer, in my closing remarks. The long-standing underfunding of social care in Scotland is not a new problem. It is a direct result of mismanagement and, I think, a lack of leadership by the Scottish Government. Thousands wait for social care assessments and support. Delayed discharges remain stubbornly high, and the number of care homes, as we've heard, has plummeted. I want to just mention that I, in the summer, did a piece for the Scottish Parliament which was around do we value social care in Scotland. And I think my last word will be the conclusion from not just me but from the sector and from carers themselves is that we do not in Scotland value it, and it is time that this government valued social care and the money should come forward for that. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Mochan. And I call Christine Graham to be followed by Pam Duncan-Glancy up to 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'd like to give some context to this debate, context of which the members are well aware. COVID still casts a long shadow over health and social care services. That's true across the UK. It's not only caused delay, but because of restrictions during the pandemic, there is no doubt that some people found their health deteriorating even more. This has brought additional pressures on the NHS and care sector. And of course, add to that the increasingly ageing population. I am one. But much can be attributed to the UK economic climate. Funding's been mentioned, so I'll talk about funding. There is the continuation of decades of austerity, exacerbated by the damaging actions of Liz Truss, continuing inflation, food, energy costs, the financial impact of increased employers' national insurance contributions, all affecting the health, care and voluntary sector, such as hospices. Finally, there is Brexit and now damaging migration policies, all at the hands of Westminster. Those national insurance increases cost the NHS £191 million each and every year in its directly employed staff, with a further estimated £40 million cost for contracted services like GPs, dentists, optometrists and pharmacists. £84 million recurring additional burden to the care sector. The voluntary sector, 75 million year on year. No wonder hospices under threat. I'm afraid the member has chosen a very short debate in what she calls an emergency, so I'm going to continue. The Scottish Government introduced a 21.5% increase in the Independent Living Fund, crucial support to disabled persons to enable them to live fulfilling and independent lives. Delivering a 62.5% increase in Voluntary Short Breaks Fund to 13 million, providing short break support for adult and young carers, is expanding hospital at home. Free personal care and no prescription charges, neither available in England, all preventative spend, no resident doctor strike here. But against that, Westminster's hostile approach to immigration could spell disaster for Scotland's care sector. I know it's been mentioned already. Scottish Care latest workforce survey from May 2025 stated that international staff make up at least 26% of the current care workforce, with some organisations made up of over 90% international workers. Over 6,800 of these workers are on visas and would be directly affected by proposed changes to UK immigration policy by the current Labour government. Funding, migration, the economy. Nobody here on the opposition benches wants to attribute any of that to any of the difficulties facing the public sector throughout Scotland and in other parts of the UK. And those international staff, my last minute, those international staff I refer to aren't just filling labour gaps. They are the backbone of care across many communities in Scotland, all neatly dodged by Dame Jackie Baillie. West Street itself has said, and I quote my favourite man, quote, all roads lead back to Westminster, close quotes, and quotes, the NHS is in crisis and all decisions that are taken in Westminster don't just affect England, but Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, close quotes. I couldn't say it better myself.
Thank you. I now call Pam Duncan-Glancy to be followed by Annie Wells. Around 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and it's a pleasure to speak today on an issue close to my heart. Presiding Officer, if it wasn't for the incredible women who work with me, I wouldn't be here today. Most days you see them racing around this place doing their job brilliantly. What you don't see, though, that is on top of all of that, they get out of their bed hours before to help me get out of mine. They go to their bed hours after me because they first had to get me help into mine. They help me to the toilet, to put my clothes on, to do my hair, to put on earrings, give me pain relief, cook, clean, fix my wheelchair, help with shopping, the list goes on. And then, Presiding Officer, they attend Parliament. Like the almost 200,000 other people working in care in Scotland, they work their socks off. And in the process, I'm empowered to work my socks off too. And so let me say to them on record today, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your service. But, Presiding Officer, we do this together not because of the social care system, but in spite of a social care system that has been plunged into crisis as a result of years of mismanagement and neglect under the SNP. A crisis that leaves tens of thousands fighting for their care to end up without the care they need. A crisis that sees unfair charging policies leave working-age households with very little income, masks unmet needs and causes significant financial hardship. A crisis that sees social care staff fighting day in, day out for better wages because, despite what their wildly out-of-touch amendment says, it is the SNP who have presided over the workforce crisis because they refused to deliver £15 per hour. And it is the SNP who cut £38 million to deliver fair work in social care. And it is the SNP that wasted £30 million on their botched National Care Service. All the while, Presiding Officer, this crisis of the SNP's making leaves a yawning gap in funding for social care. In Glasgow alone, that gap in the IJB resource today is £42 million, triggering cuts, increasing charges and possibly 145 job losses. Presiding Officer, investing in social care is not a cost, it is an investment. Good social care systems support people into employment. Indeed, it helps users sustain jobs while delivering jobs for carers, predominantly women. Good social care systems are critical to the realisation of disabled people's equality and human rights. Yet today, on International Disabled People's Day, countless disabled people are left fighting for the basics. Like the woman from Glasgow, from the north of Glasgow, who hasn't had a shower in weeks because she doesn't get allocated enough hours of care. And on that, I say to the Government that providing so little funding and meaning a meagre 30-minute visit is certainly not an attractive job to apply for, and it is that and their choices that is driving the workforce crisis, which is sadly a fact they've entirely ignored in their amendment. Or the young woman who lives with her mum, works part-time and fought tooth and nail for care to do it. When she finally got that in place, she was told the council would charge her over £100 a week from her wages to pay for it. Her mum said, and I quote, "If we had this kind of expendable income, we most certainly wouldn't be living here. I seriously don't know how we can meet this bill." It's not right that disabled people should have to fight for care to live, and it certainly isn't right that they should have to pay for essential care, care that means they can work. Taking wages from disabled people to pay for their care is asking disabled people to do the same job as a non-disabled person for less. And in other spheres, that's called an equal pay claim. This government said they'd end those charges, yet my constituent is left facing them. Presiding Officer, good social care can help people contribute to society and lead ordinary lives. Indeed, that was the shared ambition on independent living that the SNP government signed up to in 2009. But where are we now, 16 years later? Deep amidst a social care crisis, and a government's contribution to recognising that is an amendment that denies reality, as per usual, blames someone else, as per usual. It's a disgrace, Presiding Officer. I doubt at all that the SNP government will take any responsibility for the policies that have led to this crisis. Because I wrote a speech on social care almost exactly the same as this one, back when that ambition was signed in 2009. Nothing has changed, and in fact it's got worse. So, Presiding Officer, the SNP had nearly 2 decades. They have failed the people who needed them the most. They don't deserve more time. And in May next year, I'm pretty sure the people of Scotland won't give them it. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
I now call Annie Wells to be followed by Jamie Hepburn in 4 minutes, Ms Wells.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Across Scotland, social care is in crisis, and nowhere is that clearer than in my own home city of Glasgow. Day in and day out, I hear from families, unpaid carers, care workers and community organisations who are simply exhausted. They are doing everything they can, but they are being failed by a system that is underfunded, overstretched and increasingly unsafe. Glasgow's social care system is not just creaking, it's breaking. Local authorities are struggling with unprecedented pressures. The Accounts Commission has already warned that councils face a £650 million black hole, driven in large part by rising social care costs. Glasgow City Council alone has spent almost £100 million on overtime and agency staff in the last 5 years, just to keep services afloat. And that is not sustainable workforce. It's not a sustainable workforce model. That is a crisis response becoming the norm. And charities know it too. There's 240 organisations, including Age Scotland and Alzheimer's Scotland, has already warned the First Minister that the sector has been pushed to breaking point. Those words were not used lightly. But instead of fixing these problems, the SNP government ploughed ahead with their disastrous National Care Service, spending £30 million on a plan everyone told them wouldn't work, before being forced into a humiliating climb down. That £30 million could have delivered 1 million hours of care or paid for 1,200 care workers. Instead, it was just squandered. And while ministers wasted years on an unworkable centralisation project, the real issues were left to spiral. In Glasgow, we are seeing the consequences every single week. Older people waiting months for basic care assessments, families begging for care-at-home packages that simply don't exist, carers telling me that they're leaving the profession because they can't cope with the pressure, the hours or the pay. Charities are telling me that they're using reserves just to stay open, with 67% of not-for-profit providers saying that they won't survive for more than 4 years without change. This is not a functioning social care system. This is a system held together by overstretched staff and unpaid carers. The majority of them are women who are being pushed well beyond breaking point. Presiding Officer, Glasgow deserves better than this. Our city has one of the highest levels of health inequality in the whole of the UK. We have an ageing population and a growing number of people living with long-term conditions. These pressures are not going away, but the support for them has. If the government were serious about improving social care, they would start by listening, not to consultants, not to central government committees, but to the workers on the ground, the carers, the nurses, the home support teams, the charities and volunteers who keep Glasgow going every single day. And, Presiding Officer, they would listen to families who tell us they're at breaking point. They are tired of being passed from pillar to post. They are tired of hearing promises while their loved one sits waiting for months for help that should be available within days. Labour's motion today rightly highlights the scale of the crisis, but we need more than warm words. We need the Government to finally admit that its approach has failed and that people of Scotland cannot wait any longer for meaningful action. So, Presiding Officer, I say to the Ministers, stop wasting money, stop defending the indefensible, start funding local care properly, start valuing care workers like the essential professionals they are, and start treating Glasgow's vulnerable people with the dignity and urgency they deserve. Presiding Officer, Glasgow's social care crisis is not abstract, it's real, it's immediate and it's harming people right now. And this Government must finally get serious about putting it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Wells. And I call the final speaker in the open debate, Jamie Hepburn, up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, President Officer. And I very much welcome the opportunity to speak in this debate in support of those who rely on Scotland's social care services and, of course, just as crucially, those who work within the sector. These are matters that are important to those we represent. Indeed, just this last weekend, when I was out and about doing my usual canvassing, I spoke with a constituent who was able to speak to me about the quality of social care provision that her mother received, but also she was expressing some concern about the support that social care workers. And it's right that we reflect on these matters. We are fortunate to have a social care workforce made up of dedicated, skilled individuals who support people to live with independence, dignity and security. Their contribution is essential to contributing towards a fully functioning society. And across Scotland we have social care staff assisting people with an array of complex needs, providing vital daily support, helping to prevent unnecessary admissions to hospital. They sustain community independence. They strengthen our health system by easing pressures on acute care. So this is an important area for us, and it's right we debate the issue. I have to express some reservations with the amendment that the Labour Party has brought forward. It asserts that the Government has failed to prioritise social care. It says it's fuelling a crisis. These are charges I cannot accept. The 2025-26 budget provides £21 billion for health and social care, £15 billion for local government, both record levels of funding, and of course the £2.2 billion for social care integration that the Cabinet Secretary has already mentioned. It is of course the case, I think we all, I'm afraid not, Mr Gulhani, I'm not able to give the time at this stage, we only have 4 minutes. It is of course the case, I think we all recognise there are pressures on the sector. We know there are recruitment challenges, we know there's demographic change, we know that there is rising complexity, but ignoring the sustained efforts that have already been made, including investment to ensure that social care workers are paid at least the real living wage, does not help us find solutions. Jackie Baillie reiterated the call that we've heard from her before for a £15 an hour minimum wage for social care workers, although I couldn't help but notice her motion is silent on that matter. Today we can all understand and recognise the aspiration for higher pay. Who couldn't recognise that? But of course, aspirations have to be matched by costing and credible funding plans. On that point, Labour have consistently been silent. I'm afraid not. 4 minutes isn't enough time for me to be able to do so, Ms Baillie. The Scottish Government has, by contrast, taken an approach that has ensured that the living wage as a minimum is in place for social care staff, delivering a real and affordable uplift for tens of thousands of workers. I very much support the Government amendment. It rightly highlights the severe harm caused by the UK Government's restrictive migration policy, which have resulted in a drastic fall in health and social care visas and placed real strain on recruitment. It's been interesting to see that diminished as a problem from some in the opposition, but that is a problem. We've heard that very clearly from Donald McCaskill, and that's been articulated already in this debate. And I would reflect on the fact, if you are a migrant who's come here to work in social care, how could that person feel that they are a valued care worker? They are unsure whether they continue to be welcome in this country. In terms of the practical impact of the policy, but frankly also the Reform UK light rhetoric we're now hearing from the Labour Party, as well as the harder rhetoric we might hear from the Conservative Party on these matters. The Government amendment recognises the enormous value of our international workforce and is worthy of support for that reason. Just as is their reference to the challenges being posed of the sector through the increase in national insurance increases for the sector. So I'm glad we've had this debate. I reject some of the siren calls that we've heard about the crisis in the sector. I recognise there are challenges, and I'll be supporting the amendment in the name of the Cabinet Secretary this evening.
Thank you, Mr Hepburn. We now move to wind-up speeches. I call first Brian Whittle, up to 4 minutes. Mr Whittle.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I rise to close on behalf of the Conservatives. It is actually quite disappointing that this is such a short debate, because we could be discussing, as my colleague Sanders Gohani raised, how the 700,000 unpaid carers interact with healthcare, because we certainly haven't got that right. Same we could be discussing social work or palliative care or the role of the third sector. All could be topics of debate in their own right. But I have to say, I've listened to the Cabinet Secretary and the backbenchers there use the usual excuses of visas and migration for the lack of places in our social care service. A second, all the while, Cabinet Secretary, when I've already raised in this chamber, in my own constituency, Ayrshire College had to turn away 71 applications for apprenticeships in social care because there wasn't the funding. If you're going to have a debate on staffing within the healthcare service, you have to recognise your own failings, and that for sure is one of them.
Always through the Chair. Briefly, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. It wasn't just me saying this. I was quoting the sector and sector leaders referencing the fact that migration policy from Westminster is causing destruction to our ability to be able to employ staff in the social care sector.
Brian Wood.
I don't quite think those are the words we use, but if we're going to have a debate around social care and the funding of social care, you have to recognise your own failings, and the way in which you fund the social care service sector through the training has got to lie right at the feet of the Scottish Government. But the failures we're talking about today, Presiding Officer, are consequences of a whole series of decisions successive governments have taken over the years, not merely in social care, but in whole attitude to health and healthcare. They have failed to think for the long term. They have failed to see social care as being par with healthcare. They have failed to properly integrate health and social care. And while we may have spent years correctly identifying the issues within social care workforce, we have failed to take the necessary steps to address it. In the context of the NHS, successive Scottish Government have prioritised ever greater inputs, more staff and higher salaries and more money, while ignoring outcomes and solutions such as interoperable and integrated technology. Interoperable being a term unfamiliar to the Minister when she declined my amendment during stage 3 of the farcical National Care Bill because she didn't understand it and didn't like the Google definition. That's why the SNP have achieved record-high spending and record-low outcomes, despite the incredible efforts of our healthcare professionals. The Scottish Government have let both patients and our health professionals down. In social care, the situation is, if anything, worse. That whole stress on the system with a lack of investment starving essential services. The irony is, of course, that this eventually creates problems in our NHS. Delayed discharge from hospitals will never be solved if the sector providing the support post-discharge is fighting just to keep its head above water. There are fantastic innovations happening. Some health boards are using care home spaces for more appropriate step-down care for patients so they don't have to languish in hospital beds waiting for care packages. That needs to be considered more formally for those areas where that solution is appropriate. However, there is no solution to the crisis in social care without addressing the challenges of workforce. Proper workforce planning isn't simply about how many staff you have in a particular role or where they are located, who's leaving or who's coming into the profession. It's about also making sure there is career progression to ensure we can attract new staff and retain the vital knowledge and experience of existing staff. Presiding Officer, I wanted to look at the revolutionary potential of technology as an example. What would health and social care look like if in a world where the patient's entire medical history could be analysed by software and used to predict what care they would likely need, both before arriving in hospital and once they were discharged? How much more accurate could it be if their social care package included data from sensors in their home about how often they were getting up in the night, or the temperature in their home, or how frequently they lost their balance? That technology exists to do all that today, Presiding Officer. It's not even complicated. And with it, we could transform patient care and deliver more elusive and effective workforce planning. All that seems to be lacking is political will to make it happen. Health and social care are inextricably linked, Deputy Presiding Officer. Today they're fragmented rather than aligned, spending more time competing for scarce resources than cooperating to put them to their best use. That must change, Deputy Presiding Officer, because neither can survive without the other. Deputy Presiding Officer.
I now call Tom Arthur, Minister, up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I begin firstly by thanking members for their contribution this afternoon, but also putting on record my profound appreciation and gratitude to all those who work in the social care sector across Scotland, and in particular to our estimated 700,000 to 800,000 unpaid carers, without whom we could quite simply not function as a society. They really are unsung heroes, and they deserve our everlasting praise and gratitude, and not just our words but our actions as well. Because I'm just approximately 6 months into this ministerial post, and I've been listening carefully to the contributions of members across the chamber, building upon the many engagements I have had over the past period since my appointment. And what has struck me is often broadly when there are discussions around social care, it tends to fall into one of two broad areas, either the question of funding or resourcing, or of structures. And in addition to that, there is the very specific issue around workforce and recruitment and retention of social care workers from overseas. What has featured strongly in this afternoon's debate is the question of resource, and is the question of our hugely valued social care workers from overseas. I want to touch on the question of funding firstly, though. It is a profoundly important question, and it would be remiss not to recognise the significant pressure that exists across the system and the decisions that are being taken locally by integrated joint boards. It is, I think, incumbent upon all of us, if we are to engage in this matter seriously, to understand the nature of the financial challenge that we face. We have been through a profoundly challenging period economically over the past decade and a half. A global financial crash, austerity, Brexit, a pandemic, a war in the European continent that precipitated an energy and a cost of living crisis, which has placed strain upon the public finances that none of us could have contemplated. I need to make some progress, Mr Cole-Hamilton. If I've got time, I will bring you in. Prior to the election, inflation was running around 0.4%. Bank of England interest rates were 0.1%. Within 18 months, inflation was in double digits. Interest rates were at 3%. That has placed... I need to make some progress to articulate my point here, Mr Whittle. This has placed significant pressures on the public finances. Now, it is important to recognise that in the 26 years of this Parliament, there have only been 5 years when one party has commanded an outright majority. On every other occasion, for every other piece of legislation, for every other budget vote, it has been necessary for at least one other party to engage. So it is incumbent upon Parliament, in considering questions around resource, to come and to work towards consensus, and not simply to make proposals, but to have the honesty and the integrity to state how these proposals would be paid for. I need to make some progress. I've limited in time. I have got barely. I need to make progress. I have listened patiently to everyone else. So, if members are going to come to the chamber and they wish to ask for additional resource, on top of the £15 billion to local government this year, the £21.7 billion in health and social care overall, the £2.2 billion in social care, the £125 million uplift to enable payment of at least the real living wage. If there is a desire for more than that, then it is incumbent upon members to engage, not simply to abstain and sit in their hands. Now, that is no... I'm afraid I've only got a minute remaining. I have only got a minute remaining. I have got a minute remaining. I have got a minute remaining, Jackie Baillie. So it is incumbent. Otherwise, it is just rhetoric. It just does a disservice to those working in the social care sector. It does a disservice to unpaid carers. So we will see come the budget, and I'm getting the sedentary chuntering from either side, from a party that's consistently voted against every Scottish budget, and another party either votes against the budget or just doesn't bother engaging in the first place. But the second issue of importance and at the heart of the government's debate is that, given all these systemic challenges we face with the public finances, what we have seen from the UK government is actions that exacerbate and compound and make worse. Pandering to the worst instincts of the populist and reactionary right, they are pursuing a reform-light agenda, well, quickly becoming a full-fat reform agenda on immigration. It is a disgraceful approach, and the sector has rightfully highlighted the devastating impact it has had. And that is why we are taking action as a government, and why I am delighted to confirm that today the Scottish Government's £500,000 fund is opened to help to remove employment barriers. And eligible employers can apply from today for targeted support with the cost of hiring international social care workers impacted by UK government changes to immigration policy. Presiding Officer, there is much more that can be said in this, but it is incumbent upon all of us in this Parliament to work constructively with partners in the sector, and if there is an ask for more resource,
I'm now going to call Paul Sweeney to conclude the debate. Up to 6 minutes, Mr Sweeney.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I think we've spent this afternoon discussing a system that is in crisis, but there is a precious lack of systemic approaches from this government. What we have seen from this government over the last near 2 decades of their rule is increasing fragmentation, a system characterised by low pay and indeed just a complete failure of political leadership, which has led to what can be, we can even call it a system, a social care structure, which is harming some of Scotland's most vulnerable people who are reliant on it, and that is a national scandal, and it's one that affects almost every household in Scotland. All the while, our hard-pressed social care staff struggle heroically to keep up a vital public service, despite low wages and poor working conditions. And the Minister was certainly right to praise those who are either unpaid or paid carers in that sector, but it's certainly cold comfort when the system is being defended by the Minister in a way which actually exploits them, not advances their interests. Yes, I'm happy to give way.
Briefly, Cabinet Secretary.
Paul Sweeney pointed there to low pay, and I recognise that, of course, we want to do more in order to support our critical social care workers. This government has invested, as I said, £950 million in order to ensure that at least the real living wage is being applied. Can Paul Sweeney confirm whether Labour-controlled Wales or indeed Labour-controlled England has gone any further than that?
Paul Sweeney.
The Minister will know that, that the Employment Rights Bill is going through Parliament just now, which will have a massive uplift in the rights and the bargaining power of care workers across the system. It will improve rights to sickness and it will drive up wages. And the Cabinet Secretary we also want to consider has been talking a lot about sponsored care workers in the system, but they're only on £12.82 an hour, 82 pence an hour, or £25,000 per annum, whichever is higher. The minimum wage for adult social care workers in Scotland is £12.60 an hour. So I don't know how the Cabinet Secretary should stand there and justify paying overseas workers almost £500 more than staff domiciled in Scotland, and echo calls from exploitive capitalist employers seeking to rinse more out of the system. I think that is utterly shameful, and also might want to consider what the Cabinet Secretary is doing to advance the training pipeline for those who are seeking employment in the sector, because actually Glasgow Kelvin College, where I represent, said that there was 1,200 applicants for 300 places in the care system, yet they're being denied. 1 in 4 are wanting to get into the system, but they're not getting that chance to get into the sector. So in this debate we've heard time and time again that this problem seems to have nothing to do with the government. They're just hapless bystanders or well-meaning administrators, but actually it's the malevolent forces somehow outside of Scotland. I'm happy to give way. Yes.
Sanders Gohani. I was shocked to see Social Care Minister too scared to take an intervention, but I wonder if the member would agree with me that actually this crisis started in 2015 and is a crisis of the SNP's own making, and they are blaming everyone but themselves.
Paul Sweeney.
Well, we have had indeed a decade-long decline, and I was interested in Dr Gohani's observation that there were 2,000 people currently trapped in our acute hospitals at great expense to the public. who don't need to be there for any clinical reason but can't be discharged due to the lack of social care capacity. And it also noted that over the last decade, the number of social care beds have been reduced by 2,100 beds. The registered social care places have been reduced by almost the exact same amount as the number of people who are stuck in our acute hospitals. If I were the Cabinet Secretary for Health, I would have those two numbers up on my wall in my office in St Andrews House and be saying every day to my officials, why are you not driving that number down into balance? Why is that not happening at the pace and urgency that needs to occur? And as Carol Mochan said, it's because of a lack of leadership. And it's much easier just to simply point to recruitment agencies from overseas and say, oh, we can't hire enough people from overseas. Yet this is a system, a model that actually imports people from overseas to work in the social care sector, cruelly promising them a better life in this country, then doesn't pay them the same as Scottish-based workers, and then burns them out through low pay and poor working conditions. As soon as they get the opportunity, they're moving out of the sector into retail, or they're trapped effectively by their visa conditions. There's already been a crackdown, a rightful crackdown by the government on exploitative rogue care providers, which has released around 40,000 posts in the UK looking for new visa sponsorships. Why is the government not going further to absorb those 40,000 people in the system looking for new sponsors? Around 650 in Scotland alone. It's not about loading more people in, it's about not only absorbing the people who are currently looking for visa sponsorships in the UK and actually bringing in more of these people who are applying for social care courses. I'm sure the Minister can start to see that a systemic approach is needed here. It's not simply good enough to stand there and point the finger elsewhere. This is 18 years of government we're talking about, 18 years. Surely some responsibility needs to be taken on board. And instead of creating an economic model of solidarity where structural gaps in funding are addressed, £15 hour wage is the norm and working conditions are improved. We should hope that there's always a steady stream of people desperate to come in to depress wages further, rather than training the people here in Scotland and employing them under improved conditions, which is what Labour is aiming to do with the Employment Rights Bill. And not only that, we've seen an evisceration of local care. The health and social care partnerships, as members across this chamber will know, are lumbering under huge cuts. Every year we see a depressing litany of services that are being unnecessarily and painfully curtailed or cut altogether because of the £500 million gap in funding in local provision. And that is causing all sorts of disastrous situations, such as the Scottish Hunting's Association, an amazing charity that Glasgow City's Health and Social Care Partnership are planning to defund from the start of next year. And we're seeing cuts coming quickly and regularly due to these gaps, which then piles up in our A&E departments. In fact, I met an A&E nurse who had just come off shift a couple of weeks ago from Glasgow's Royal Infirmary. She's saying that there's already beds piling up in the corridors. And just across the road from where she was staying, there's a care home that can't admit new patients because of a lack of communication between the social work department in Glasgow because of cuts. So again, system breakdown. The care homes can't admit, the hospitals can't discharge, staff are burning out. It's introducing more cost to the system, and the solution appears to be somehow just to import more labour into the system. Mr Sweeney, could you bring your remarks to close, please? I think it's shameful that the government has used that framing in its amendment, and I think it should be rejected by this Parliament. We can do so much better than this as a country.
Thank you, Mr Sweeney. That concludes the first debate this afternoon, and there will be a very short pause before we move on to the second Opposition Day debate. Thank you.